Welcome to the Meditation Podcast. You can find all our episodes on meditationpodcast.org. We're also on YouTube. You'll find the links in the podcast description. I've got 4 other podcasts: the Speaking Podcast, the Awakening, the Learn Polish, and the Crypto, as well as being a podcasting coach. You'll find everything on bio.link/podcaster. Today, my guest, she's actually a licensed clinical professional coach, internal family systems therapist, meditation guide, and holistic health coach. A lot of lovely, interesting things. Please welcome Heather Shannon.
Thank you, Roy. I'm happy to be here and happy to talk about meditation and other things.
Yeah, no, so I mean, to be honest, I definitely touch on the meditation, but it's mainly what your qualifications. So I suppose let's go first into your kind of your journey, your meditation journey, as well as the whole journey of how we got into being a therapist.
The meditation journey is interesting, and it actually correlates with when I was a client in therapy. So when I was in grad school, getting my master's in counseling, they kind of recommend that you go do some of your own counseling. And so I saw this therapist. I only wound up seeing her for a couple sessions, but she was kind of like, you're a little anxious. There's a meditation temple right around the corner. They have services that are open to the public. Like, maybe go check it out. And I don't think I did right away, but at some point I got there, and I don't think I had any magical experiences, and I didn't really know how to meditate. I just showed up and sat quietly, basically. And I think that was just so delightful. I was like, oh, it's just quiet. This is different. Okay. So I guess I enjoyed that on some level. And I think that a lot of things in my life, it's like, there's a goal and there's an outcome that I'm after, and I'm trying to kind of make something happen, And this was one of the first things where it's kind of I'm not quite sure why I keep going back, but I just keep going back, and it kind of pulled me in. And so it was a really different experience for me in that way. And I think it felt very balancing and kind of organic. And so I kept going there. It was kind of spotty at first, and then eventually I got more consistent, and they had some little classes and discussion groups that I would go to. And then maybe 4 or 5 years into going, they were kind of if you want to officially become Buddhist, you can. So then I did a precept ceremony, and officially became Buddhist, and my family was pretty supportive, which was nice. My aunt and uncle even drove up to the north side of Chicago on their scooter and attended my ceremony, along with my immediate family. And so I went there for, I think 9 years. And then I went to, I moved and I went to the Shambhala Center in the West Loop of Chicago. And I was kind of interested and ready for that because they have a lot of courses. They have more of a path that's laid out. And so I was curious just to see where that goes. So I went there for, I don't know, maybe another 4 or 5 years. Both places wound up having sex scandals. So that was interesting to go through. And so for me, when Shambhala had that, I stuck around for a little while thinking okay, shit happens kind of, and let's see how we deal with it. Let's see how we recover from it. And it just wasn't feeling right for me. I was I think there's some stuff that's woven into the fabric of how everything is organized here that's not being addressed. And I think I need to peace out. So since then, it's been more, meditating on my own, or meditating as part of breath work or yoga, or with clients. I do meditate with some clients as well. So yeah, that's kind of been the journey to today. I did become a meditation guide while I was at Shambhala. So I went through some additional training to do that. And I did welcome the newcomers, and I would be the person that would be okay, you're here, you've never meditated, you don't really know what to do before you kind of join the big room. Let me kind of sit down with you for a bit and just go through the basics. So that was my little volunteer job.
Excellent. So what's the kind of meditation that you do? Do you do silent, or do you have music? What's kind of the one that you kind of go towards?
So both places that I went to did a silent meditation. And I do like that. I like it a lot because you're really working with your own mind. I liked Shambhala's instruction a bit more. It felt like a bit better feel for me. There was a focus on feeling. And so it felt like this very like embodied experience. Whereas at the Zen temple, it was more of a focus on like counting breath and like noticing and awareness, rather than that direct feeling experience. So the feeling really works for me. So I like that. And I also will say I do guided meditations as well, you know. So it just kind of depends like on the day and how I'm feeling. Today I did a little bit of the silent meditation. I don't know, I like the stillness of the silent meditation. So I would say overall, that really does draw me in. I also feel like it's a little harder at times. And so having, either some kind of gentle music or an audio is really good for me on days when I'm like, I don't want to do the silent one. And I'm like having some resistance. And I'm like, okay, what if I can just like be a little gentler with myself and do a guided one? Or if there's something specific, that I'm wanting to work on. So a couple nights this past week, I did like a manifesting abundance, really kind of long, like 60-minute guided one before or as I was going to bed. So that was actually great. I'm pretty fussy, I will say, about the audio on the guided ones. It's like I'll listen to a few seconds and see if I like it, and then I'll kind of bookmark the ones in the Insight Timer app that I like best. So yeah, I would say the when I find a guided one where I'm like, ooh, I really like the voice, I really like the music, I like the topic, then I'll repeat that one a few times.
And with the two places that you studied under, what do they, with the eyes, do you keep your eyes open or do you try to close them and just?
Yeah, so they both did eyes open, which is interesting because everyone I was instructing would kind of assume eyes closed. And I think that maybe that eyes closed is more common, but so I think that was maybe a little bit unique that I had like at least 13 years of eyes open instruction.
Yeah, because some people think that, well, if I have my eyes open, I'll have a lot of distraction. But the reality is, I think you can, I love being on a beach and just looking out into the open. I feel like that's one of the best places for me.
Yeah, and that was one of the things I really liked about the instruction at Shambhala too, was that you weren't trying to shut out any of that sensory input. It was, hey, the focus is going to be primarily on feeling the breath and all the sensory input. I remember one time there was someone outside the building, like just outside the building, dribbling a basketball. So that became part of the meditation. It was like this very distinctive sort of echoey sound at the time. And you'd even hear your own breath. You'd hear the stomachs of people next to you. It's like the second the room gets quiet, everyone's stomach starts rumbling, right? So that was always interesting. And yeah, so I agree with you. I think that can be lovely sometimes, not to feel like you have to shut it out. And I also think having your eyes open can be more difficult. So much like just the silent meditation in general, because you're not escaping, you're like really, really like, okay, this is life, and I'm just going to be really present to whatever comes up. So I will say sometimes I want to close my eyes, or sometimes if I want to have more of an internal focus, I will close my eyes.
I know that when I moved there where I am, that I like the silence, but then the cars were now they were annoying me, and then it was I read something and was kind of like, you just have to embrace all this stuff. It's a part of what's around you, and once you stop making it being annoying, it's no longer annoying. Because sometimes I think, especially people that are starting, or even sometimes there's people that are doing it, it's like if you think that a dripping tap or whatever it is that's annoying me, you're no longer in a meditative state. You've lost the point.
Right. You've lost the point. Yeah, I mean, right, because then you're with your thoughts and and it's great to notice that, so one of the things I tell people is that, don't have this expectation going into meditation that you're just going to clear your mind magically, I'm like, it doesn't really work that way. And like, we all have thoughts and our brains are kind of wild and they're going to keep pulling us away from having a single focus on our breath or whatever it is. I know it could be a mantra, it could be, looking at a candle, plenty of options there, but yeah. So it's like, okay, what if we just keep noticing? And I like what Dan Harris said in the 10% Happier book when he was on a meditation retreat and he was kind of newer to meditation and being kind of hard on himself. And he started shifting into thinking about noticings per minute. And I loved that. It's like, instead of, oh my God, my brain's all over the place. What if it's like, ooh, I noticed that my brain was all over the place 30 times this minute. That's pretty great. And I liked that shift in perspective a lot. So that's something I use with my clients too.
And like with the mind body, because you mentioned the yoga. So like, when did you start doing yoga?
I mean, I have to say, I'm not like a yogi by any means. I'm not like a 5-day a week yogi person, but I've been going to a couple yoga studios in the area since I moved to Florida a couple of months ago. But I'm really into like the restorative yin yoga. I go to one called Yoga for Empaths. We usually do like one pose and lay there for half an hour.
Doesn't that become painful? No, that even thinking of that makes me feel pain. Like,
No, you're like, you use the different yoga props to, position yourself and really support your body. So it's not like you're holding a lunge or something or like a warrior pose for a long time. It's like a very restful pose that's meant to support you. So it's quite lovely actually. I like that for helping to just kind of calm my nervous system.
brilliant. And
Yeah.
with the therapy then that you're doing, because I know you're coaching others as well. How did that journey begin?
Yeah, well, I started as a high school counselor. So I did that for 6 years. During my 5th year of that, I started a private practice with a friend from grad school. And it was funny because I had always wanted to do a private practice. So when she approached me, I was kind of like, yeah, why haven't I started this yet? So I think the universe was giving me a little nudge there because she very quickly decided, no, thank you. Entrepreneurship is not for me. And then I very quickly decided I can literally never work for anyone else again. So found my thing, which was great. And so I started the practice in 2011. And then, along the way, I worked with people a lot. I started out focusing more on anxious people and like type A achievers and some addictive compulsive behaviors. And everyone that came in wound up talking about relationships, just because they're just so core to our lives. And I think that relationships I think they are the most rewarding and the most challenging area of life for a lot of us. And then I had some clients who were really brave in talking about, sexual trauma or sexual identity. And that was really meaningful for me to see, like, there's really not a lot of safe spaces to explore that. And people were getting into the kind of thing where you wouldn't really get into that with like your friend or your buddy, And I realized that I'm naturally very open-minded and not very judgmental. Not zero on the judgment because I'm a human still. but so then I decided eventually to become a certified sex therapist. And so that's kind of the main focus of my work now, but it overlaps so much with mindfulness because there's so many kind of pre-programmed social scripts that we have around sexuality. And I know I'm actually curious what it was like growing up in Europe, because I think Europe is so much better than the States when it comes to sexuality. But in the States, it's just very negative messaging. If you have sex education, it's only negative messaging. So, so I feel like there's a lot of work there to be like, okay, like what do we need to kind of unlearn, and I think of unlearning also as part of the mindfulness and meditation journey. So I feel like they fit quite well together.
Excellent. So you're coaching other therapists, yeah? So basically just making sure that they're staying on track. And how does that work?
Yeah, so I did recently start doing a little bit of business coaching for other therapists, and that came from me quitting insurance. So I used to accept insurance plans for therapy, and I got to a point where insurance plans didn't pay me a couple times for periods of months. One of them I had to move back in with my mom for like 4 or 5 months. So that was traumatizing for me. And just realizing that when I do that, even if I'm investing heavily in personal development and professional development, which I always am, you never get paid more. So there's no incentive. And so whether you're fresh out of grad school or you've been, a therapist in private practice for 40 years, everyone gets paid the same. And so that wasn't working for me. The errors they would make with, when I changed my tax ID and then I didn't get paid for months, or when I was going to add myself back into the insurance panel and that took them 6 months. I just got to a point where I'm like, no, we're just not doing this anymore. So I quit insurance and, was able to raise my rates a little bit more, have a pretty healthy work-life balance. And so that was something that people started reaching out to me about it here and there. And I thought, I'm going to do a workshop for this. So wound up doing a few workshops and recently had a coaching group for other therapists who were looking to leave the insurance network specifically, or even who had already. And it was actually really cool. So we just had a small group and everybody was very spiritually inclined in the group and sort of into energy healing and metaphysical practices that they would incorporate into their either coaching or therapy work. So we had a great time actually, which I don't often associate with business coaching, but it was fun. It was like and I think that I really enjoy being a cheerleader for people, and having gone through kind of all of the angsty and self-doubt feelings of making some of the transition, it felt nice to just offer that kind of empathy, support, and then tactical information too on making the business change. So
Excellent. And like with the energy, because at the end of the day, the mindfulness and when you're talking about love making or sex, whatever, it's
yeah,
like there's such a connection. So like
yeah.
and what happens then when, like, because there's sometimes people get it and they practice it, and then say the partner is there's like blockages, because I'm sure,
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah, that's where I would probably get into the internal family systems therapy. So that was a training I did. So I lived in Puerto Rico for 14 months and I did the training like a week after moving from Chicago to Puerto Rico. So and it was based in Europe. It was actually based in Poland, where you live. So the training was based in Europe because there's like a 2-year wait to get into the training in the States. And so I'm like, I don't want to wait 2 years. Like, I really want to do a more in-depth training on this. And it was like a 14-day training. So I had to get up at 2:45 in the morning for 14 days. It was broken up into like 7 days and 7 days to do the IFS training, but it's a pretty cool method. It's really unique, and some of the important tenets of it, the main thing is self energy. So self energy comes from, like, the way they developed the concept of self energy comes from a lot of spiritual traditions, and including meditation and mindfulness, and kind of the state that people get into. And so they talk about the 8 C's of self energy. So I'm not going to get all 8 of them off by memory, but it's calm, creative, confident, connected, curious. So those are a lot of the qualities of the self energy, and it is a being state. And so I think that's very much aligns with meditation. So it's like when I'm meditating, I'm being. That's kind of I feel like that's the practice I'm doing. And so that's what our self energy is. And the idea of self energy is that we all have self energy. You can think of it as like source energy, like we're all from the same source, we're all a creation, and it's kind of like our best higher self is sort of how I think of it. And so that's the essence of who we are. That's like on a deep level who we actually are. And then we have parts. And so the idea with the parts is that we have manager parts, firefighters, and exiles. And so the manager parts are proactively running our lives. So the parts are much more action oriented than the self energy. And then, so the managers are proactively running our lives, making plans, setting goals, that kind of thing. The firefighters come up when something starts kind of going wrong. So like maybe we start feeling an emotion that we're like, alert, alert, that doesn't feel good. And yeah, so the firefighters might be things like avoiding something, escaping something, any kind of vice or like substance that we turn to. Like it's like, oh, I gotta have a couple glasses of wine. It's a tough day. Shopping, gambling, sugar, sex, whatever it is. So ways we escape. Firefighters get a really bad rap. One of the important things to remember about the parts is they all have good intentions. And both the managers and the firefighter parts are actually protecting the exile parts. So the exile parts are things like feeling not good enough, feeling like a failure, feeling shame, feeling unlovable. And those things, surprisingly, when I did the training, they were kind of like, well, here's like the 3 or 4 things that are exiles. And I was kind of like, that's it? I'm like, do we all just have the same ones? And their answer was yes. We all have the same ones. So we all have the same qualities of self energy. We all have the same types of exiled parts, which I think is cool. Honestly, I think it's like that reminder that, we're all connected. We're all one. We all come from the same source energy. And so the way we work with parts in internal family systems, because there's a lot of methods that will work with like the inner child or the inner critic or something like that. And those can definitely be considered parts. The key thing about internal family systems is that we're working with the parts from a place of self energy. So the idea is you don't have to like grow your self energy. You don't have to cultivate it. Really what's happening is it's, they call it a constraint release model. We have parts blocking. So you brought up blocking. So the parts will kind of block the self energy. And I think of it as kind of like something traumatic might happen in our life, and a part learns that it needs to protect us in a certain way, and it might take over. And so sometimes people will feel like, oh my God, why am I an anxious mess? Or why am I just like so panicky? Or why am I like full of rage? And I call that like a part takeover. The internal family systems method would call it being blended with a part. So it's like that little, I think of it as like a little energy body. That little energy body kind of takes us over like our physical body. But the second we become aware, and here's where mindfulness comes back into play, the second we become aware, we're not fully taken over anymore. And that's really cool. And then you can ask the parts, and it's the whole thing is amazing. You could ask the parts, hey, anxious part, or hey, rageful part, can you give me a little space? Can you give me a little space so I can talk to you instead of being you? And the vast majority of the time they will. And the cases where they're like, no, I'm taking over still. You can ask them to just turn the dial down on the intensity. It's like, okay, this is feeling like too much right now. Can you like turn the dial down a couple notches? And they'll usually do that then. So those are actually some basic ways that people can work with their parts on their own. The Insight Timer app, and I don't know if your audience is familiar with that, but Insight Timer is a great meditation app. They actually have some internal family systems meditations in there that are free. So Richard Schwartz is the creator of the method. So if they go into the search function and look up either IFS or Richard Schwartz, they'll find, maybe 8 or so 10-minute meditations on working with parts and understanding the IFS model. But so that's, if people feel stuck, that's what I will do, is figure out what part is coming up, what part of the body is impacted. So a lot of times when we're anxious, we might feel it like in the throat or neck. And so we kind of tune into like, what is the body sensation? And then seeing if we can get to a place of self energy with relating to that part. Because usually when we start, Not always, but usually clients are like, I hate this part, or like, or I'm uncomfortable, or I'm frustrated with this part, or I'm annoyed with this part. And so if we can get to a place of like curiosity or compassion for the part, then we're in business.
And when somebody loses their libido,
Yeah.
that's kind of energy as well. Is it like
Oh
what's
yeah. I completely view that as life force energy. So I kind of view sexual energy and life force energy as the same thing. And it makes a lot of logical sense because we're all alive because somebody had sex. Unless we were a petri dish baby, but there's not a lot of those. So we're all generally alive because of sex. And so I think, it just makes sense to me. And so when I see people have a lower libido, sometimes it's medication related, right? But sometimes, a lot of times, it's because we have a part coming up that's trying to protect us in a way that is numbing or a way that is compartmentalizing. And so we kind of think maybe just like, okay, sex doesn't feel safe in some way. Maybe it doesn't feel safe physically. Maybe it doesn't feel safe emotionally. Um, Maybe we've been so vulnerable, and it can happen if a spouse gets a major illness. That might be a reason people kind of pull back or detach. It can happen because somebody went through a really painful breakup. um it can happen because somebody feels, I work with a lot of like newer moms. They can feel kind of touched out, like, oh my God, my children are kind of pulling on me and grabbing me all day, or I'm picking them up, or I'm doing this or that. And, it's kind of like the last thing they want is to be touched. Um, it can happen because people have just had some sexual experiences in which, maybe they were vulnerable and the partner didn't receive them in a safe way, and, was maybe judgy or critical, or maybe they had performance issues and judged themselves. So that's again where a lot of the mindfulness comes into. It's like, can we be nicer to ourselves, please?
And on the opposite side of the spectrum, then when you've people that are like, say, addicted to either sex, porn, masturbation or something like that, what's the best way with dealing with that? Because like from my experience just with dealing, everybody's got something, like you've talked about it, whether it's gambling, everybody's got their vice, whether it's alcohol.
Oh my God.
But a lot, it's either sexual addiction is one of the things that people suffer from.
Absolutely. And when I first started focusing on sex therapy, I got a lot of that without kind of advertising for it. People found me. So yeah, it was either pornography or chatting with people online or meeting people in person, even if they were in a relationship already. And I think that that's probably a firefighter part, that's looking for validation, and maybe we're not really feeling in tune with our own self energy, we're not feeling fully secure in ourselves. And so we're looking for not only the validation but a dopamine hit. And I do think some people have naturally more or less balanced levels of dopamine, and so that could manifest in a lot of different kind of risk seeking or thrilling behaviors, not just sexuality, but certainly sexuality is one area where it can manifest. And so that's kind of how I work with people, is learning how to show up for themselves instead of seeking something outside to make them feel a certain way. And I'm human too. I still seek things outside myself to feel a certain way. Let's not pretend we're going to get down to zero with that. Maybe, and then we'll be enlightened or something, which would be very cool. But let's not rule that out. But in the meantime, we're human, and I think we do have to be compassionate with ourselves. That we are going to have a hard time being present sometimes, and we are going to have coping mechanisms. And I think if we can see those parts as having positive intention and be compassionate and curious and find out maybe what that positive intention is, a lot of times the parts don't want to be doing that job or role for us anymore anyways. They're kind of like, oh my God, I'm so tired, I've been working so hard trying to like help you in this way. And then if you're able to show up with self energy, which is infinite and unaffected by trauma, and the part's able to lean on the self energy for help, and it doesn't have to work so hard, it can actually shift into like a much more enjoyable role for the part and for your whole system. So that's basically the work that I'm helping people do.
I think with the kind of meditation, mindfulness, you just become more conscious with yourself. So you realize when something is out of sync, or even, you have, as you mentioned, compassion for others. When you see that they're kind of reacting, you don't think it's at you. You kind of have the thought process and the ability to kind of realize, your partner is angry, not because of this situation, but because of something previous or some other situation. And then you're not going from a, position of attacking. You're more from compassion and love. And then it kind of doesn't escalate.
100%. And I feel like what you just described is part of like the Gottman couples counseling method. It's like, how do we bring things up and how do we receive them? And they talk a lot about, the softened startup and kind of like, how can you bring things up in a way that's not accusatory, that's not blaming, that's just like, hey, here's how I'm feeling and here's what I'm noticing within me. Can we discuss it? And then if your partner's able to receive it in a way that's, okay, cool. This is about you. This is not about me, but yes, I am able to receive it and support you. Like that's amazing when that happens. So when I'm working with couples, that's definitely the goal.
So I know that I read something on one of the channels that it was about the Madonna whore.
Oh, yes. That's definitely a thing still. So yeah, when I mentioned sort of the Madonna whore complex, what I was talking about is that, women in particular seem to kind of get classified in two ways. And it's been interesting even hearing like men talk about it. So kind of like, okay, this is, this woman is pure and I love her and she's kind of up on a pedestal. And so she's the Madonna. She's like, virginal and pure and perfect and beautiful. And then like, oh, this person over here is kind of like the mistress or the sex worker, or this person is like dirty and sexual and I can be like raw and animalistic with her. And it's kind of this idea that like, first of all, that they're two separate people and they're two separate entities and kind of like that they can't coexist. But I've heard men who are part of the kink community talk about like, oh yeah, when we first started dating, I would like do all these nasty things with her, but now I love her, so I can't do that. Which just cracks me up. I'm like, what? I'm like, but she's into this. You're saying she likes it. I know, but now I can't. So it's just this like mental construct of, how we view women. And I think women, internalize it as well, where it's kind of like, I can't go to, what would be like an example? Or I don't want to say that I like anal sex, or I don't want to say that I'm into whatever it is, right? Because that means I'm going to be in this, the whore side of the equation, and then I won't be a pure, respectable woman with a good reputation. And so, especially doing the parts work in the internal family systems, I'm like, we are many things, people. We can be many things at once. And humans are beautifully complex. And so there was a post I did on Instagram recently that was basically saying that it's like, you can be religious and highly sexual. You can be highly sexual and still very pure. You can even be pure in how you approach being so sexual. You can be someone who would be great to bring home to mom and also very, uncensored and open in your sex life. So that's kind of the message I'm trying to get across to people is, we don't have to fit in one box. We can just be ourselves. and when I
saw that, I because I was thinking, is it the case of somebody after a few drinks? Because sometimes people get totally different after a few drinks, and you're kind of wondering, why aren't they like that normally? And it's like a complete yin and yang, a complete flip. And is that they just they're afraid when they're not drinking to actually be themselves?
Yes, I would say yes. I think you nailed it. I mean, and I that is something that happens around sex too, because we might have all these messages of like, this is not okay to be this way. this is frowned upon, or this is not respectable. And then they have a few drinks and they're kind of like, oh, inhibitions have gone away, all good, and then they sober back up and then they feel bad and guilty and, not good. So I do think, that's part of why I love the internal family systems method, because it's all about accepting and befriending all of your parts, and there's a book, I actually haven't read it yet, but it's called No Bad Parts. the whole book, just the title says it all. It's like, there's no bad parts. Like, what if there's something to be learned for all of them? What if there's an intelligence and wisdom in all of them? And I kind of view it as like, we are all a microcosm of the universe, and our parts are kind of a microcosm of us, and so they have their own complexity as well.
Excellent. And just finally, because I know you've been on the Daily Beast, Hustler Magazine, and Giddy, and different things. So are they all just articles, or were they actually programs that you've been on as well? Because I'm not familiar.
I think those are
I don't know the
mostly
Daily
interviews.
Beast or Giddy. I've never heard of it. I've heard of Hustler, of course.
Yeah, mostly interviews. The Hustler one was an article about sex at different times of the day, and kind of like what to do if your partner, wants morning sex and you want evening sex.
Do both.
Just all of the above. Yeah, so most of them are interviews. Trying to think if there's anything. Yeah, some of them that was like they'd look for expert quotes basically, or support of like what they were trying to write about. The Giddy one, I think, was about different types of jobs within my field, which was kind of interesting. So they talked to someone who maybe identifies as like a sexologist versus like a sex therapist, or who's certified, or who's, a coach and not certified, and what their background is. So that was kind of interesting too, just helping people find the right providers basically. And the Daily Beast one was a little while ago. That one was pretty funny. I think it was about like after quarantine, people were wearing very little clothes. And it was kind of like, what's going on with this? Why are people wearing like very skimpy clothes? What do we think is like the psychology behind that? So I commented on that for them. Yeah. So it's fun. I really feel like it's fun for me seeing like what are journalists writing about, and like what are the things that are really of interest to people within the field. And so it's fun to be involved with that for me.
Excellent. Listen, Heather, thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. You might let people know how they can get in contact with
sure. Thank you, Roy. Likewise. And thanks for everybody for listening. And one of the tools that I have that might be good for this audience is my Sex for Empaths checklist. So it's a free gift for everybody. And you don't have to be an empath or identify as an empath to benefit from it. But really what it is a list of, here's the ways to make sure you're in alignment with yourself when you're approaching a sexual situation, to make sure that it feels right and authentic for you, that the partner that you're choosing is somebody that feels healthy. So if you're somebody who's struggled with, using sex for validation, or compulsive sexual behaviors, or guilt, or anything like that, this is going to be an amazing tool. They can find it at my website, which is just my name. So it's heathershannon.co. It is not a .com, just heathershannon.co. And there's a whole freebies page there. So they can check out the Sex for Empaths one, as well as a couple others.
Excellent. Yeah. And I know you've got all the YouTube channels as well.
Yeah, so all the links to all my socials.
Everything is on
that
that
too. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. So I'll make sure I put that both on the audio and the video. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Roy.
So that's all for the Meditation Podcast. You'll find all our episodes on meditationpodcast.org. As mentioned, we're on BitChute and YouTube. And be sure to give us a 5-star rating, thumbs up, share with your friends. Really helps. Until next week, take care.